Hello everybody, it's Joanne Fedler here, and today is Friday and it is my dedicated writing day. So I look forward to Fridays immensely. It's like my little island at the end of the week where I know that I can just dedicate myself into the craft of writing and I don't have to worry about the world outside. I think for a lot of us writers, that escape into the inner world is such an appealing part of the writing process. So just to say, this has been quite a challenging week for me, and there's been a lot of negative energy in my space. And I think a lot of us can relate to that. And then we come to the writing and we often feel very burdened by energies that we've had to manage. So one of the ways that today I know I've got to go and write, so I don't want to bring any of that negativity into my writing space. So the first thing that I do is I get up really early, and I go for a walk, and I play my my dance music really, really loud, and I walk and I sing to myself and I do my little dance jigs, and I literally shift the energetics of all the kind of stuck energy, the energy that has come my way. I literally push it out of my body. I feel the music inside my head. I feel the movement of my body. I get completely in touch with how grateful I am to be alive, to have another day, to get the chance to be in this body, because this body is really the instrument that I'm going to use to write, to get into a kind of a connected space for my writing. So I know Tony Robbins talks about, being in a peak state. I guess it's kind of something like that. It's about really being in a state where the writing is going to come from a place of lightness, a light space, not to come from a place of darkness. Always when we're writing, the important thing is to stay connected into yourself, to stay connected to your story and your character, to stay connected into your body, to stay connected to what is around you, and to make sure that you're not holding on to stuff that is not yours. So really just to move through it. So that's what I've done this morning, and I am feeling really light. I'm feeling really energized. I'm feeling alive, and I'm actually really excited to get home and to start writing. And what I wanted to talk about today, because it's one of the things that I'm thinking about a lot for my new book. When I talk about setting, when I teach setting, I always talk about how setting is one of the really effective ways as writers that we can show our themes rather than tell them. So our themes need to be hidden inside, buried inside our story. We don't really want to knock our readers over the head by saying, this is a story about betrayal, this is a story about revenge, this is a story about alienation, or whatever it is. The subtlety of writing is about taking a theme like that, really getting to grips with it, understanding it, and then subtly investing it into. You could invest it in a character. You can invest it in an object. An object can hold a lot of your meaning for you, symbolism. But a really fantastic way of doing this kind of showing is through setting. So with my book, I'm exploring this relationship between mothers and daughters, millennials and women in menopause. So this kind of lack of connection, this difficulty, this kind of cynicism of this younger generation who've really inherited a world full of the problems that our generation has caused, the older generation has caused. And and the mother who is, whose life, whose youth is completely hidden from her daughter. It's like, our kids don't really know who we were before we had them, but we were people before we had them. And we don't always want our kids to know everything we've done. A lot of the stuff was pretty stupid and pretty, it's our secret garden. It's all the things that we that made us adventurous and risky and rebellious and all those things. But then when you become a parent, like, you don't want all of that part of your history to be on display for your child. So in a way, we hide and we sublimate that inner life, that hidden past life of ours. And I really want to try and bring that up in the writing. I want to show it. I don't want to tell it. I want to show that this mother is really saying to her daughter, what you see, the way you perceive me, it's a fraction of who I am. It's not all of me. It's this tiny little part of me. But at the same time, she of course doesn't want to tell her daughter all the very dangerous and risky things she did as a young woman. So the way that I've started to think about this is about how to use my setting to explore the way in which these two generations don't really understand each other, and to really explore the cynicism of the younger generation, or the way in which the younger generation perceives things differently from the older generation, and to poise it in a place of doubt, to poise the story in a kind of on a precipice of doubt. Because, I don't think a story ever should be offering clean and neat answers to a reader. I think really what a story should do is to really ask some challenging questions of a reader. So we're not there to kind of tie it all up in a neat little bow for our reader and say, look, this is how it is, right? It's more like, how is it? What is it? What is going on here, really? So I've chosen to set the story in 2016. And why? And sort of early 2016. And the reason I've chosen that is that it was the year just before Trump was elected. So it's just before a very important kind of change happened in the world of our perception of how things were. And you have Hillary running for president. So, there is this great sort of, for many of us, kind of a hopefulness that maybe, America would elect a female president. And at the same time, there was just this sense that for many of us that, there's no way that Donald Trump would ever be elected. So it's kind of poised around that time, but because it's actually, part of it is set in Australia, I've also chosen to set it at the time when, in Sydney, an entire, about 100 of these very, very, very ancient Moreton Bay fig trees were destroyed, cut down by the government to make space for a tram. And there was a lot of controversy about it because these trees were so old and ancient, and and some people were incredibly outraged, and some people didn't care. And there were some protests, and some people kind of chained themselves to trees and then got arrested in the process. And as these things happen, and so my main character is one of these, the woman in her 50s. She's outraged. She was outraged. Also, some of these trees were said to be located on very sacred Aboriginal land. There was sacredness to them that was completely dismissed. And so the mother is somebody who really cares about this, and she's protested. And the reason is because, as well, in her history, she has a history of protesting and standing and protesting the way that I guess my generation did, which was often with placards and marches and that sort of thing. Whereas I in the millennial generation, I think the idea of protests and the way in which that generation expresses their outrage, I think technology has really plays such a huge part in all of that. And so there is a real disconnect between the way that we both understand, these generations, I think, I'm not sure, I'm still exploring it, understand what it means to oppose something. So I'm exploring that as a setting, and the book will end, with the sort of the mother saying to the daughter, "Listen, you don't need to be so cynical. Things are getting better in the world. Things are getting much more hopeful in the world, and look, Hillary's going to be the next president." And there is part of me that feels kind of as if it's almost like this. This book is like got that feeling of like having an omen. There's like a sense of almost like the story, the Dr. Seuss story of the Lorax. Unless we do something, what is the world that our children are inheriting? I don't want this book to be a downer, of course. The book has got to have hope in it. I always think our writing should arch towards the light. So it's going to be a challenge to layer that. But I feel like that setting really does capture for me a kind of the complexity of where we are in the world right now, and somehow where the conversation has to go, which is around the way in which we say no to things, the way in which we protect the things that are important to us, the way in which we stand up for things, the way in which we and the way in which we communicate those things to each other. Because I think for the daughter, the millennial daughter is very caught up in this whole the struggle for gender equality, especially around gender identity. And she's saying to her mother, I don't understand why you would go and get yourself arrested over like a tree, and so it's just about exploring the differences between those two. So those are all my thoughts. It's been really good to have a walk outside, to connect with nature, and to connect with the natural world as I'm going in to write this particular scene of the protest, and of the mother standing and trying to explain to people why we shouldn't be cutting these trees down, and why it's important for us to honor and preserve these trees. So that's just some insight into my writing for today, and the thoughts that go on before I sit down, try to sort of connect in, think a little bit before I just go and write, set myself a goal for today, what scene I might write, what scene I might get into, get a feeling for the textures, the sounds, the smells, the feeling of being out in the natural environment, since I am going to be writing about that today. So I hope that's interesting and helpful. Bye.